All right, the Pelicans select Yves Missi from Baylor with the 21st overall pick. Is he the future starting center or another wasted pick like Jaxson Hayes? Let's break it down into a live episode of Locked On Pelicans. Let's go.
You are Locked On Pelicans, your daily New Orleans Pelicans podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome to another edition of Locked On Pelicans, the daily podcast covering your favorite team, the New Orleans Pelicans and NBA, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day, available wherever you get your podcasts and available on YouTube where we are live right now. By the way, I'm doing this from a new setup, so let me know if something's not working in the comments down below, please. And of course, thank you for making Locked On Pelicans your first listen today and every day. We're here Monday through Friday, the #1 Pelicans podcast, covering and breaking down everything you want to know about this Pelicans team. And we're going to do a live show breaking down the 21st overall pick, your newest Pelican, Yves Missi from Baylor. Is this a good pick, a bad pick, somewhere in between? Why did they go in this direction? Who could they or should they have taken? I will give you my opinion on this here. And then we'll get into a little bit of a Brandon Ingram trade talk, why something did not happen today. I don't think there's a reason to panic with that here. And then we're going to do a bonus segment, maybe even show. I'll hang out with y'all for a while after we do the regular episode of Locked On Pelicans. We'll go a little Locked On Pelicans after dark. I've got a shocking trade target for you that is going to make you happy that the Pelicans didn't make a Brandon Ingram deal today. So that's going to come in the bonus show, only available on YouTube. So please subscribe wherever you get your podcast and on YouTube as well. Today's episode of Locked On Pelicans is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. We knew what the pick was going to be, especially with the way the lottery was shaking out. I don't think the Pelicans drafting Eve Missi, center out of Baylor, is any shock. And when I did my prediction show that premiered today, I said they're going to draft this guy. And it's been telegraphed, I think, a little bit. And this is something the Pelicans do. They tend to lock in on a guy kind of in the middle of the draft process and then kind of stick with it and don't seem to move off of that. Let me know what you think in the comments on YouTube. Good pick, bad pick, somewhere in the middle here. So why they drafted Missi makes a ton of sense. The physical tools are there. This is a guy who is 7 foot with a 6'2" wingspan, has good size at 230 pounds, is young, not even 21 years old. He's barely 20 years old, and has all of the physical tools you want. At the NBA Combine, all of his drills, the verticality drills, the agility drills, all of those were pretty good. He has a 9'2" standing reach. You put your arms up, it's 9'2". You're almost at the rim right there. And that's what they like. The Pelicans like these tooled athletes to come on in, these physical tooled athletes to come on in and try and develop them. This has kind of been their draft process and motto throughout the time here. They took a swing like this with Jaxson Hayes early. And so when they look at Yves Missi, they see a guy that can fit next to Zion Williamson. This is someone who adds rim protection that they have been missing. One of the most impressive things about him is not just the 1.5 blocks per game in this one season at Baylor, but he was nearly blocking, he blocked over 7% of shots when he was on the floor. That is an insanely high block percentage, one of the advanced statistics we like to use when it comes to this sort of thing. That's a really good number, and that's what you want next to Zion Williamson. They wanted rim protection. They have not had this for a while now, and now they have it. So this is what they have been looking for and exactly what they wanted. So I think they're pretty happy drafting Yves Missi to give you that. The athleticism makes you think he will thrive in the NBA. When you look at some of the other guys available here, a guy like Kyle Filipowski, he does not have the athleticism that Yves Missi gives you. Missi, while he isn't a polished scorer on the offensive end, one of the things that you look at with this guy is vertical spacing. You don't need to be a polished offensive guy. They just need him to be a lob threat. Go up and get the ball and just throw it in the hoop. Have someone, and there's an issue with this, and more on this in a moment, throw up an alley-oop lob attempt for him, and then just have him flush it down. That is something that Jaxson Hayes might be able to do. If they address the point guard situation, that is something that they might be able to do. They don't really have lob throwers on the team. Maybe if they trade for Trae Young, who is a lob thrower, you'd be able to do that a little bit more. But here's the thing. He could be a starter. He could come off the bench. We don't really know just yet. And it ultimately doesn't matter. This is a guy that they're hoping will develop in a couple of years and become a starter alongside Zion Williamson and give you that hyper athletic big man that you need with him. That is the most important thing, the thing they had been looking for. This would not have been my pick. Again, the potential for him is there. We see that. But we've also been here with Jaxson Hayes before. It didn't pan out the way that we were hoping it would. Hyper athletic center. Just like Missi, he was very young. Missi's only been playing basketball since he's 16 years old is when he started playing organized basketball. A lot of raw potential there for him to turn into somebody. Didn't happen with Jaxson Hayes. The Pelicans hope that Missi has a higher motor, and from talking to people around the draft and things like that, there aren't really questions about his motor and anything like that. So I think he's going to step in and he's going to try really, really hard. And they've just got to mold him, and they've got to do a good job. To mold him, you need to play him. And this is where I think things are going to be a problem. Right now, I'm sure everyone's kind of looking at Derek Lively as the example of get a center in the first round, have him play off the bench or start and make an impact on the team. And he did a very, very good job of that in Dallas. Is Missi going to be able to stay on the court? And I don't even mean Willie Green not playing him. And Willie Green, the Pelicans head coach, isn't exactly the type of guy that loves to play rookies. Missi can defend. He can defend the rim, certainly. But the problem is I see Missi, at least being early in his career, a guy who is going to get you in foul trouble. Like I think is going to, while he has all the tools and the verticality in terms of leap ability is there, I think he's going to have trouble going straight up and down and contesting shots in a way at the NBA level, and that might be a problem. If he's racking up fouls early on, I don't know if that's a guy that can be played for this team. So while at 21, you're not expecting to get a starter, you're not expecting a guy to come in and light it up. This is a Pelicans team that is drafting for potential and need, but also you need to get guys on this team right now. And I don't know if Missi is actually going to be a contributor this coming season. I think if you're looking for ceiling potential, there were other guys they could have taken at this spot that have a higher ceiling than him. If you were drafting straight for fit or someone who could help right away, Filipowski could have done it. Deron Holmes could have done it. Let's look at that and kind of compare Missi to some of those guys. Look into some of his other numbers here and look at some of the games from him too, because there's some things here I think that are really important to look at with him to kind of figure out where he's going to fit into the Pelicans rotation. That's coming up here next in a live episode of Locked on Pelicans. Don't forget, bonus part of the show that's coming up here at the end too. So coming up next, let's look more at Missi, compare him to some of the other players the Pelicans could have picked, because I think this could be a decision that, it could work out very well, or this might be one where in a couple of years we look back and go, what were they thinking? It's coming up here next in today's episode of Locked on Pelicans. Today's episode of Locked on Pelicans is brought to you by Game Time. Summer is a kind of a slow time for sports, but Major League Baseball, MLB games are still going on. So if you're traveling, if you're not in New Orleans and you want to go see a game, Game Time is the way to do it. Getting out to the ballpark's a lot of fun. Sitting out, having a drink, peanuts, sunflower seeds. It's just a great way to spend an afternoon, an evening, even those early games. And Game Time's going to make it easy for you. And Game Time is my go-to ticketing app for anything right now. Not just sports. You can do it for theater, comedy, other shows as well, because Game Time just takes the worries and concerns out of buying tickets. You're going to a place you've never been before. Game Time has a preview of your seat in the app. You'll be able to see the view from your seat before you buy. They also have last-minute tickets, flash deals, and things like that. If you're bored on a Friday, don't know what to do, open the Game Time app up. See if there's something going on that you now want to go to, and all of a sudden, you've got an awesome Friday night, an awesome date night. And with the Game Time guarantee, if you find tickets in the same section and row for less, they're going to credit you 110% of the difference. So you get just peace of mind when you buy with Game Time. So take the guesswork out of buying MLB tickets or anything else with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, use code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account, redeem code LOCKEDONNBA, LOCKEDON NBA for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest prices guaranteed. And thank you for making Locked On Pelicans your first listen today and every day. We are here Monday through Friday, the #1 Pelicans podcast, covering everything you want to know about this Pelicans team. So please subscribe wherever you get your podcast. Join over 10,000 Pelicans fans on YouTube. I saw someone in the comments there saying that it's over half the Smoothie King Center. Pretty cool number. Be in that number. Subscribe to Locked On Pelicans. For your second listen today, I'm going to tell you, go check out Locked On Sports Today. It's going to have all of the biggest draft coverage you need. There's going to be a lot of places that are just screaming why. They're going to be talking about Bronny James and other things. You don't care about the guy who's going to get taken 55th overall. So Locked On Sports Today, a free 24/7 streaming channel program for you every day to bring you the biggest stories without all the yelling. Locked On Sports Today brings you can't miss analysis, opinions, and news streaming 24/7 on YouTube or the free Fire TV channels app, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. So we are breaking down the Pelicans taking Yves Missi out of Baylor, 21st overall. Again, it makes sense just on that, right? It makes sense that you draft this guy. They need a center. They don't really have a great option to finding a center. So drafting one makes sense. This is just the center, the big men that they like the most. Khalil Ware was off the board. Zach Edey was off the board. They weren't going to be able to get those guys. They liked Edey a lot. You know, I think Ware would have made a lot of sense because he shoots threes. But if they're not available, at this point, it's just kind of like choose your flavor on everything here, right? Like season to taste kind of is what it is. Missi was the guy they liked. I would have taken Deron Holmes II here out of Baylor. That is a guy that screams Naz Reid to me and a type of big man that is more modern day, more 2024. You know, a guy that shoots threes, gives you rim protection, and moves with the ball. And we saw the impact that Naz Reid had for the Minnesota Timberwolves this past year. They are going to probably have to go cheap at the center position. Maybe we'll talk more about that in the next segment with a Brandon Ingram trade. You know, if you trade for Trae Young and you're not bringing Capella or Okongwu back, you're going to have to just sign Andre Drummond. And I think that's fine, but it's fine at best. That is not a good move. That is not someone you want to have play heavy minutes for you. If Missi is going to foul a ton or not give you what you need, you're screwed at the center position a little bit. Filipowski would have stepped in and would have been able to play and been serviceable. And that's all the Pelicans need from this center position. So Missi's bar is not very high in his rookie year to clear. I do not know, though, if he's going to be able to do it. Now, we've seen Zion thrive without a three-point shooting big man. Steven Adams doesn't shoot threes. He did fine. You saw it with Jonas Valanciunas. Doesn't shoot threes, that's okay too. And Zion's still able to score. But I do see Missi fouling a lot at the NBA level, and that's something that's going to keep him off the court. So it then still does not answer the center position question for New Orleans, even if he actually fills a need. And his production in college, while good, wasn't tremendous. 10.7 points, 5.6 assists. The 1.5 blocks was really good. A 7.3% block rate is a really good number, but he's going to need to be a little bit more. You know, the good news about him and some of the other positives that, you know, if we're trying to be optimistic about it, and again, this is not the guy that I would have taken, is he does have good hands. That's one thing that I think is undervalued in big men. You know, go back to the Omer Asik days, right? Like that dude had stone hands, right? Like he just couldn't catch a ball. Missi can catch the ball. That means you can probably get him, you know, the ball down low and he can try and score. That means you can get him at the, you know, in a lob or something like that. You know, he also hustles on rebounds. Rebounding was a problem for New Orleans at times last year. He can defend in space. and he's going to be aggressive on the boards. And I think that's a really important thing, particularly on the offensive glass. Him and Zion going after offensive boards is going to be ridiculously fun to watch. Second chance points are some of the easiest scoring opportunities you can get. You don't love them because you got to miss in the first place, but this is a guy that can go out and get those offensive boards and then get him back up and score. And I think that's a really important thing. He can play in the pick and roll and defend in the pick and roll. He's good as a help defender as well. So there's a lot of positives there. I just think it's going to take a little bit of time for him to develop into the guy that you want. But when you look at some of the others available, and I'm a little bit behind on the NBA draft right now, so if something happens, that's an important thing. I see if there's a trade or something like that here. You could have taken De'Ron Holmes, who went one pick after I saw. That is something that maybe was worth doing here. I'm very high on him. 3-point shooting big. He's not as big as Missi, 6'9", not 7 foot. There's a difference there, but he's a high flyer. Again, reminds me of Naz Reid. That would have been my pick there. You also could have gone with someone like Isaiah Collier out of USC, who at one point was being mocked in the top 5 of the draft and things like that. So that's something that I think is really important to consider here as well. Is there an opportunity cost that was missed? And that's not great, right? Collier could be the next great point guard of the future. They didn't want to take a chance on him. So those are things to consider with this pick. I think it can turn into something good, but this is not the pick that I would have taken, and I don't particularly love it. But it does take time for rookies, and anyone they were going to draft 21st overall was not going to probably be the most impactful player this season for them. So that's worth keeping in mind too. But I do also think that this is something that the Pelicans have been searching for an answer. They've been searching for a center to put next to Zion Williamson since they drafted him, right? They started with Derek Favors and Jaxson Hayes his rookie year. They went with Steven Adams next. Then they went with Jonas Valanciunas. That's 4 or 5 guys that they've looked for to try and pair next to Zion. They keep missing, or it just keeps not working out. Like Valanciunas wasn't bad. He just wasn't the best fit. Adams only lasted 1 year, partially because of salary dumps and other things too. But that wasn't right. Missi's still in the vein of those guys. They have still yet to draft a stretch big to pair next to Zion Williamson. And I think that's something that one day I wonder if we're going to look back on and go, why didn't they do that? Not that those guys are massively available, right? Not that you can always find 3-point shooting bigs and things like that, but you had 1 or 2 available here in the draft. That's going to be the open question mark, I think, for me for a long time with this. Let me know what you think about the Yves Missi pick in the comments down below on YouTube. I don't love the pick. I don't absolutely hate it. I just don't think he's going to be able to contribute right away here, and I would have gone in a different direction with it. But look, he's the newest Pelican. We want to embrace him. It's kind of as simple as that, and this is the reason that they drafted him. So coming up next, let's look at why Brandon Ingram wasn't traded, right? We heard some stuff at Trae Young, which is completely overblown, by the way, and I'll break all of that down. Let's get into a Brandon Ingram trade, Trae Young, and some other things here in a live episode before we get into the bonus part of the show, where I'll answer your questions, look at the chat, and then give you a trade target that none of y'all are expecting. None of y'all are expecting, and this is someone that just keep an eye on. That's all I'm going to say. That's coming up here next in today's episode of Locked On Pelicans. And thank you for making Locked On Pelicans your first listen today and every day. We're here Monday through Friday, the #1 Pelicans podcast covering everything you want to know about this Pelicans team. So please subscribe wherever you get your podcast. Join over 10,000 Pelicans fans on YouTube as well. I have fun doing these live shows. We'll get back to doing these a little bit more over the summer and everything here. We just had to get through the draft and all of that. We're going to get into free agency. We're going to have this is the Thursday show. We'll touch on in this segment here a little bit of the second round too, and then get you set for free agency on the Friday show and everything. Trey Murphy needs a new contract. What do we expect that to be? All of the things you want to hear about for the next week, we're going to have you covered here. So it's a fun time to be a Pelicans fan. So please subscribe. Tell a friend about the show. For your second listen today, what you got to listen to is the Locked On NBA podcast. I'm on there every Wednesday, and so we recorded last night for the Wednesday show today. It was me and Brad Rowland of Locked On Hawks. Pretty good timing on that. And we talked a lot about a Brandon Ingram trade and what that could look like and what the Hawks were going to do with the #1 overall pick. So make sure you give that a listen to as well. Make that a regular thing. I'm on there every single Wednesday. So let's get into the Brandon Ingram part here of everything, because I think a lot of people had unrealistic expectations that a deal would get done today. If you say, if you're a longtime listener or an everydayer, I said, I don't necessarily expect a deal to get done tonight. I was saying it might be 50-50 in a couple places on the radio. So I'm not shocked that a deal hasn't gotten done, and I don't think there's a reason to panic yet or anything like that. I do think that some of the reporting out there, and there was a report from Yahoo, from Jake Fisher, who's really, really good, was talking about Trae Young, and a lot of people I saw immediately turn it into Trae Young wants to be in New Orleans. That is not what the reporting says, y'all. The reporting says New Orleans is one of a couple agreeable destinations. Agreeable destination is very, very different than I want to be there. And that's something that we've got to keep in mind with all of that. It's an idea that he's open to, but the Hawks don't have to do anything about that if they don't want to trade him. And right now, we don't know if they actually want to trade him. And if they don't want to trade him, you can't get a deal done. And it's as simple as that. I also don't think a deal needed to get done on draft night. And frankly, if you think about it, the Hawks probably had their attention elsewhere tonight, figuring out what they want to do with the #1 overall pick. So that is something that is maybe holding up a Brandon Ingram trade. There's also money and other things like that you've got to consider that make this really, really complicated. If you're bringing back Trae Young and his salary is significantly more than what Brandon Ingram makes, and it is, that's something that you've got to factor in because they've got to plan out the rest of the roster too. Donovan Mitchell was traded in September. You can still get a Brandon Ingram deal done later when you understand what your roster is going to be and where you are financially. And I think that's something to keep in mind with that as well. It also does sound like that even if the Pelicans, even if Trae Young wants to come here to New Orleans, and again, he says agreeable, and it's not from his mouth. Don't forget that, Anthony Davis said publicly that every other team than the Pelicans was on his list of preferred teams, and he only wanted to go to the Los Angeles Lakers. So keep that in mind when it comes to that. It doesn't necessarily mean anything. And again, if Atlanta doesn't want to trade him, that's just how it's going to go. I also think the Pelicans do like DeJounte Murray more than Trae Young. I would prefer Trae Young over those two, but Trae Young hasn't necessarily proven it either in the NBA. Good scorer, good three-point shooter, or at least good with court gravity, but that has not translated to winning in any real tangible way out of one fluky season. Now, Brandon Ingram and Zion Williamson haven't translated into tangible winning either, so it's worth it to kind of make some sort of trade, but I think they've got to look for the right thing. And while of the available options, Donovan Mitchell is not coming here, right? Some of these other things is not going to be, manifesting or happening. So I do think then that, Trae Young's the best out of all available options. It doesn't mean it's like the best option like out there. And maybe it should mean the Pelicans have some more patience with a Brandon Ingram trade. That's something that I do think is going to be important. Patience with this deal is key. You don't want to rush and make the wrong kind of trade that potentially sets you back, because then you are looking at a Detroit Pistons style rebuild, or a rebuild like the Washington Wizards are going through, where they're just completely blowing it up. You have Zion Williamson here. You've got to make the moves count this summer. Rushing to make a trade just to make a trade, or because other teams made a trade, the Knicks making moves and other things like that, that I do think is what part of the issue is. So that's where I think we kind of stand with the Brandon Ingram trade. He still could be moved tomorrow. One of the things I think that you are going to see here is, with the draft being 2 days now, where you have the first round on Wednesday, the second round on Thursday, teams get a chance to reset. They can reevaluate draft boards. They can look at their team. They can see other deals that got done, have a night to sleep about it, and then start conversations again in the morning. So that's something that I think you've got to look at here. And that's a factor into it too, of why maybe something didn't get done right now. It doesn't mean something won't get done in the future, but very few big, we've got a couple of big moves, but I don't think those are things that the Pelicans were going to be in the running for anyway when it comes to that. And they've got to find the right thing when it comes to all of this. So that's something to keep in mind on why a trade didn't get done, but I wouldn't say that means to panic here with everything. So still look for a deal to be worked on. It might not happen right away. It might go into the summer, more into the summer too. And I think that's a realistic possibility, but I do think there's going to be some other, trade targets here that we will talk about in kind of the bonus part of the show. And when I interact with the chat here, and some of y'all in the chat need to absolutely chill out. I will tell you that. We're going to start muting some people in a minute here. So keep that in mind with the Brandon Ingram trade. The Pelicans are trying to put the right pieces around. They're building around Zion, right? Like, it's very clear they are building around Zion. The Brandon Ingram fans can be upset about it. It's fine. It's the reality of the situation. Simple as that. Missi factors into that, even if it's not the pick that I would have made. But this is the team that they're trying to build, and we will see what goes on. Something to keep in mind, the Pelicans don't have a second-round pick. I don't expect them to get into the second round. I don't see why they would, unless they really feel the need to fill a roster spot here. And that's something that you've got to look at. So if they need to just fill a roster spot on the cheap, maybe a second-round guy can do that. But I do think they have others that are Carlo Makovic and others that they could try and put onto that roster. The undrafted guys, I think, are going to be some of the more interesting things to look at. The Pelicans have had a lot of success getting an undrafted guy and turning him into a two-way player, and then having that guy make the roster. Kenrich Williams, Najee Marshall, Jose Alvarado. There's a couple of guys out there that I do think they are going to look heavily at to try and get in terms of undrafted free agents. Let me pull up the names that I have. There's two I want you to really keep an eye on. The first one is Antonio Reeves of Kentucky, 23 years old. That's a guy I think that at the end of tomorrow, they're going to look to have maybe made a move for and try and sign on a two-way deal or something like that. And you get 3 two-way contracts right now. He's a guy I'm pretty high on, would fill that guard position, give you a flyer on that as well. And then the other player is Anton Watson from Gonzaga. I do think he, as a forward, as a wing with good size, is a guy that they would really like, that both can give you shooting, both can give you aggressiveness and rebounding too. Those are names to keep an eye on when it comes to the undrafted side of things here. So coming up next, I'm going to end the show, do this normally like I do. That's going to be the podcast side, and then we're going to interact with your chat here. I will answer your questions. We will talk about this here. That's coming up here next with a secret trade target that is a Western Conference guy that you do not expect. That's coming up here in a bonus part after I do the outro, hit the video and all that. That's coming up here next in a bonus part of Locked On Pelicans. So that's going to do it for the normal part of Locked On Pelicans here. As always, I'm your host, Jake Madison, at NOLA Jake on Twitter. It's been the Locked On Pelicans podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Stay tuned for the bonus part. All right, we're live with the bonus part. I will spend a little bit more time here looking at the looking at the, guess the player silver roof that I'm talking about here before we get there. It's not someone that we've mentioned on the show here. So Christopher Friend says Paul George. Nope, that is not who it is. No one we've talked about. I'll tell you here in a second. So a couple things. Everyone chill out in the chat. Shane Mitchell, I see you, and I keep seeing you trying to call me out. We're not going to do that tonight. I got too much work I need to do where you're saying, I hated Missi. No, I've said repeatedly on the show, I don't like Missi. It wouldn't have been my pick, right? I didn't spend a whole podcast saying no. So if we're going to act like that, we're not playing that game here. So I'm going to get that out of the way because that's annoying me when I'm trying to do a show for all y'all. So let's move on from that, right? No, Missi wouldn't have been my pick. I would have taken Deron Holmes there or Collier. Or Tyler Kolek, too, I actually really, really liked. But that's the pick here, and I'm giving you the reasons why they drafted him. So let's get into a couple of other things. I see a couple people saying, saying we need a pure point. I don't know if they need a pure point, right? I do think that is a misconception here with everything. I think you're going to have Zion Williamson handle the ball more. You can have other point guards, but you don't need one to run the offense when Zion Williamson is out there on the court, right? One of the issues they had earlier on in the year was they tried to take the ball out of his hands. They tried to make him an off-ball guy, and it wasn't good. It wasn't good. You need to put the ball in Zion's hands. Zion is one of your point guards, one of your ball handlers. It's as kind of simple as that. A pure point, just get a half point guard that does other things well because there's not that many pure point guards left in the NBA. So that transitions to what I was gonna talk about here. And I'm curious what y'all think. And you're gonna call me crazy on this, and I'm gonna tell you that I'm not. So the kind of secret trade target that I think the Pelicans should go after is, you ready for it? Jamal Murray from the Denver Nuggets. Jamal Murray from the Denver Nuggets. They are in a really, really weird spot. Their salary is exceptionally high. They are a second apron team, and they need some flexibility around that. And when you look at their team, they are built around Nikola Jokic tremendously. That is the guy that they want to build around. And I think they could view Murray, who at times has been slightly inconsistent, but also injury prone for them and did not play particularly well later in the playoffs for him this year, as a guy that they can maybe move to open up their window for contention again, because it did feel like this year it really, really closed on them harder than I think anyone was expecting. And so Jamal Murray, I think, for the right price, is someone that you could get. The Nuggets will deny this. They're not going to at all say they're shopping him. But say a team were to call the Denver Nuggets and go, hey, what about Jamal Murray? They're not going to slam the phone down. They will take the call, they will talk, and they will not immediately hang up on you. And I think that is something that is worth considering. It would take a lot. I don't think they would trade him straight up or have a deal centered around Brandon Ingram. I think you would need to include probably Trey Murphy and or Herb Jones in a deal. But that is a name out there that I do think could be available. It would need to be something like Trey Murphy, Herb Jones, and Brandon Ingram, and maybe a pick or two for Jamal Murray. But if that's what you're looking for, you might be able to go and get a guy like that. Maybe it wouldn't cost that much. You need to also make salaries work and things like that. And you need to figure out what bad contract from Denver you need to take back to make this kind of work. But they're not in a great spot when it comes to their salary cap situation. And so if they want to be able to continue making moves and not just run with this team, which was worse, right? Pretty much the same team, more or less, than the year they won the title. And now they're pushing that second apron, which really limits the moves that you're able to make in the NBA to improve your team. So they're very limited on how they get better. That's something that I do think is at least going to be a call that they make. I don't think a trade will actually happen, but that's the guy that I would try and go and get first before a Trae Young. Someone who's someone who can be the number 2 next to Zion Williamson. Those are the type of guys that I would really be looking for here. And I think that's going to be a call that the Pelicans make. That might be why you haven't seen a deal with Atlanta yet. Those are the type of things that I think, you could, as I kick something here, could really go for and could be really interesting. So I've got about 15 minutes here. So let's take your questions and everything and interact with the chat a little bit. Let me know what you think about Jamal Murray here. I've got to text someone else from Locked On. And we'll kind of go from there. So what else do you want to hear about? What are the other questions you have here? And we'll go from there with everything. Let's keep it cool in the chat, though, too, with everything here. So put your questions in here. I'll kind of scroll through it a little bit and try and see. I see a lot of y'all saying that's too much for Jamal Murray. It could be. I agree with that. Like, we love Herb Jones. We love Trey Murphy's probably going to be a starter for him next year. I think that's an important thing. Smoke says, still haven't forgiven the Pels for drafting Buddy Hield over Jamal Murray. I have an old show for like who here, let me ask you this question in the chat. Who here listened to the show, because it was pre-YouTube, when I talked about like the secret story about why the Pelicans drafted Buddy Hield over Jamal Murray? That is because they worked out Jamal Murray and his agent wasn't there. And he played one-on-one with one of the Pelicans assistant coaches and got lit up. Now he scored, but he played zero defense against a Pelicans assistant coach in a workout. Not an ideal situation there. Daniel Brown has a great question here. Do you think Missi and Jaxson Hayes are similar? I think they're similar in the overall like archetype, right? Like and not even quite that. I think it's, you look at that and you go, oh, okay, like it's just a big man that needs a lot of work and has a lot of potential. That is not an ideal player to me. They're similar in that regard. They're not similar in the way that they play. Jaxson Hayes was not the defender, was not the rim protector, was not the shot blocker or rebounder that Missi is. So if you're kind of comparing them side by side, I like Missi better than I like Jaxson Hayes. And I really liked Jaxson Hayes in that draft as a big to pair next to Zion Williamson. So it just comes down to, can you get the potential out of them? But I do think Missi is a significantly, like it's not even close, significantly better defender and rim protector than Jaxson Hayes was. But there's a similarity in the sense of like, they're both raw and they're both centers, right? Like that's kind of that sort of thing. Jonathan Bordeaux says, why not keep JV and develop Missi? So one, JV doesn't want to be here. He doesn't want to be here. They didn't play him in the second half of games. They didn't do those sorts of things. He wants to go to a team that's going to kind of value him and play him. I also don't think that if you're going to not play a guy that much, you don't want to be paying him $15 million when you're pushing into the luxury tax. And that's something that, it's kind of like asset use management, that sort of thing. If you don't play him, why are you paying him? And I think that's the reality of a situation. Silverwolf says, also, isn't JV's house for sale? Yeah, it's like listed for sale somewhere with that. So that's also a factor into this. Charles Blunt says, do you think Devin Booker is available for trade? I would move like heaven and earth for Devin Booker, but he's not going to be available. Neither is Kevin Durant. The Suns are going to at least continue on with this for another year or something like that here. Nola Star Bar, shout out to them. BI from Murray and Capella. And we're good now. Like that, I think BI from Murray and Capella, or BI from Murray, not Jamal Murray, DeJounte Murray, and Okongwu, one of the centers, is like the most likely trade that we're going to land on. That's also not something that I think you need to rush and like get done today with everything. So that's why I also don't think you need to like stress that a deal hasn't get done today. Shane Mitchell, being cool. Cap space, if we lose Jonas Marshall, they don't have cap space. They won't have cap space. The way the salary cap works is you're an under the cap team or you're an over the cap team. And that is not, the Pelicans are an over the cap team. They won't have cap space to go out and like spend a ton of money in free agency. And there isn't really like a ton of guys in free agency that you'd want to get. One of the things that, I even talked about this on the Locked On NBA podcast last night. Free agency doesn't work like it used to. It's mostly sign and trades, things like that. I've seen a lot of people wonder about Nick Claxton. He's going to be re-signing with the Brooklyn Nets. He's not going to be coming here to New Orleans. I think they should go cheap with the center position with all of that. What's your thoughts of Nola keeping BI and trading CJ? I don't think CJ has a ton of value around the league. I think BI has more value than him. And I think that when you look at, CJ, he has more value to this team than he would to any other team. So I think that's a big reason why they are keeping him. Jared Culberson says, Pels ain't paying to win. They're going to pay the luxury tax this year. They basically have to pay the luxury tax this year. If they want to truly even just make the playoffs. I don't think, they can get around that. If they don't, I'm going to rightly rip them on here. But like one of the things, that stat is they're one of 2 teams to have never paid the luxury tax. They also, at least in the Benson era, let's not go for different ownership because it's an entirely different thing. Let's just look at the Benson era because looking at previous owners doesn't matter anymore. In the Benson era, they have not had a reason to pay the luxury tax. Like there straight up hasn't been a team out there, a Pelicans team that's worthy of paying the luxury tax for. You don't want to pay it just to pay it, right? Like that's, I think, something to keep in mind. They haven't had a reason to pay it. This year, they have a reason to pay it. If they don't pay it this year, or at least go into the season looking like they're going to pay it, then we have a problem, and then that's something we'll talk about. But let's cross that bridge when it comes to it and not borrow a problem that might not happen for the future. So I see a number of y'all saying Isaiah Collier is still available, which is a little bit surprising to me that he has fallen that far. If you could do it for cheap, I would trade up and get him only if it's cheap. He's falling for a reason. There's a lack of a 3-point shot with him. There's no shooting with him, really. That's something that worries me. Could you play him, Missi, Zion on the court at the same time? Like, I'm not sure. And that's, I think, a bit of a problem and something, I'd rather use those future draft assets that you would need to trade back into the first round to get Missi. I would rather, at this point, like save those for a Jaxson Hayes trade, right? Oppenheimer says, how hard is it to trade up 5 spots in the draft? I mean, it depends, right? It can be hard. It can be kind of easy. So those are the type of things that I think, you've got to factor into all of this, right? Skullful Shack says, we have so much shooters not playing. I mean, part of it, they have one. They have I'm completely blanking on Jordan Hawkins there. Like I wouldn't worry about, Matt Ryan, who's on a 2-way deal and was basically kind of like out of the league till the Pelicans rescued him, right? Like that's just something about him as a player. Fine for New Orleans, but his defense was really, really bad. Not a highly rated prospect, that sort of thing. So yeah, they have shooters that aren't playing. I don't know if they want to like draft another non-shooter here and that sort of thing. Jonathan Bordeaux says, could they restructure deals to get under the tax? No, so you can't. NBA contracts are like more or less fully guaranteed. You can't redo those. It's not like the NFL. It's a very different salary cap structure with everything here. Sydney Montreal has a good question here. Jake, what point guards are out there? I think you can get a backup point guard for pretty cheap. A guy I said, so if you are an everydayer, this, it's the show that I did that's like the ideal Pelicans off season. And one of them is just go get a guy like Monty Morris, just cheap backup point guard that will give you solid minutes. Again, Zion is your point guard. CJ can do it as long as he's not doing it full time. He can do it in spurts here and there. So there's point guards that you can get, assuming you're not trading for Trae Young or DeJounte Murray, who's going to then be your point guard for everything. By the way, seriously, go listen to Locked On NBA because we talked a lot about that, me and our Hawks host, kind of with everything here. Daniel Brown says, luxury tax for Najee. Like, yeah, that would put him deeper into the luxury tax. That would put him way deeper into the luxury tax. But, is he worth it? Maybe, maybe not. At times he's pretty good. At times he's not. I see a couple of y'all saying Chris Paul, like, if he isn't on that $30 million deal, yeah, it would be fun to bring him back, have him come off the bench. I think that could be pretty cool. Killian Hayes is a name, maybe, but he wasn't good. They waived him for like a reason. He's not a particularly good player. I think that's something to keep in mind with all of that here. John Wall, I saw he wants back in the league. Like maybe we'll talk about those names probably the beginning part of next week as we get into some of the like more off season in terms of like free agents, because like those cheap names are the ones that they're going to need to go after with everything here. Brody Boudreaux says, why are they trading Brandon Ingram? A lot of y'all keep accusing me of wanting to trade him. I don't particularly care either way. I'm fine bringing him back. I'm fine trading him depending on what the deal is. It's what the Pelicans are going to do. The fit between him and Zion Williamson was not great. Was not great this year. His lack of 3-point shooting is something that is actively hurting the team, and that is a choice that he is doing. So that's a problem, right? If he is going to change that shot profile, then it's a different story. But if he's not, that's where we're going to run into an issue and have been running into an issue, and it creates that kind of clunkiness. He likes to take difficult shots, right? When you watched Brandon Ingram in the playoffs, again, there's some him being hurt, whatever. Did he draw a double team? Did he beat that team? No. That's a problem, right? That was a really telling moment. And I think that was kind of eye-opening a little bit to the New Orleans Pelicans and kind of people around the league. The Utah Jazz took Isaiah Collier. Think about it this way. That's actually good. That's actually good that the Utah Jazz took Isaiah Collier, and that's something we're going to talk about, right? They have a guard. They have a guard that I don't hate in Colin Sexton. You know, if they want to go full-on development, do they trade Colin Sexton? Does drafting Isaiah Collier mean Sexton is going to kind of be pushed out? They're somewhat similar players. Except Sexton can shoot more. 18.7 points per game, 5 assists, 83% from 3 for his career. Like, those are pretty good numbers. And he can get downhill and attack. Like, I like him. He's a little undersized, but that's okay. Like, I would go and try and get a guy like, sorry, I'm like struggling to breathe here, Colin Sexton, who's on a pretty cheap deal too. That's something that I think maybe makes a trade like that a whole lot more likely. That could be a lot of fun. So something to keep in mind when it comes to that as well. So there you go. Maybe that might be a show, by the way. Does the Utah Jazz drafting Isaiah Collier mean Colin Sexton is now kind of the guy? Nola G says, Jake, what's the word on the availability of Lauri Markkanen? You know, I think he is going to be extremely expensive. Extremely expensive. If Bridges went for, 4, 5, almost 6 first-round picks, it's going to be like around that same cost, if not more, right? Like, it's going to be maybe more than that. That's something to consider with that is extremely expensive. Let me ask you all this. What position does Lauri Markkanen play? He's not a center. He's not a power forward. He's like a small forward. How do you kind of structure that team? It gets really weird. You could argue for just bring the talent in and figure it out later, but the fit of that team is a little bit weird. Now, you haven't won anything, so who cares about fit potentially, but something to kind of keep in mind with all of that as well. So that's something you've got to look at with these trades. Brandon Ingram and like a ton of picks, but they'd asked for Trey Murphy or Herb Jones in that. You know, are you going to give up those guys for that sort of thing? I think that's kind of part of the problem here. So we'll see what ends up happening there. I'm trying to pull up a statistic right now, by the way. That can be tough to figure out. Saw someone say Zion's not a point guard. He and Brandon Ingram had basically tied for the highest assist percentage on the team, 26.5%, higher than CJ McCollum. That's a really high number. He's assisting on a quarter of all made baskets when he's out there on the court. That's what Zion is doing. He's not a point guard in the sense, but point guards create for others. Zion, even with his court gravity and his passing is good and he's a selfless player, as is Brandon Ingram, does that. That fits the kind of point guard mold with everything. A couple of y'all saying Robert Williams doesn't have knees. It's a cheap option. I don't think he's the answer to that sort of thing. So they're still going to need to figure out the center position and what they want to do there and how that's going to go. Let me know what you think. Again, let me know what you think about the Missi pick here. We're going to wrap up in a minute or two here. A couple of y'all saying you'd like Colin Sexton. A couple of y'all saying no. D-Rose, that's a funny name. No. We'll see. There's still way more to come. I don't think there's a need to panic that a deal didn't get done. There's still chances a deal could get done tomorrow. People are going to reset once this first round is over, and we're kind of nearing all of that. Chung says Brooke Lopez or Robin Lopez. Not Robin, but Brooke. And he's someone that I talked about the other day as a trade target. It's tough to figure out a deal with him with his salary, but he's a guy that is aging, but could probably still give you like 1 or 2 good seasons, and that could be worth it. I do like that Collier pick for the Utah Jazz at 29. He really, really fell here. I wonder who the Boston Celtics are going to take too. That'll be kind of interesting. All right, let's wrap up there. I appreciate y'all. We've got a ton of y'all in here. This was super cool. Thank you all for hanging out with me, making Locked On Pelicans part of your draft night. It's a lot of fun being talking to you here with everything. There's going to be a whole lot more to come with the Pelicans. This is not a team that's going to stop just yet. We'll maybe do another live show next week. So we'll talk more. I appreciate y'all. More to come on. This is the Thursday show. We'll have the Friday show for y'all as well. So I appreciate y'all here. This is the Locked On Pelicans podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. As always, I'm your host, Jake Madison, at NOLA Jake on Twitter. And I'll be back with y'all tomorrow.